A big hello to all of you fellow stitchers and crafters, and a warm welcome for joining us on this 2022 Making Zen online retreat. I am Jerry Berman, otherwise known as Jerry in Stitches on Instagram and YouTube, and I am happy and excited to be one of the speakers of this event. My presentation today will focus on marble dyeing fabric with the shaving foam technique. I'm in love with marble dyeing because it is such a fun and creative activity, and it also produces these marvelous marbling patterns on my garments. My daughter and I always have tons of fun when we do this together. So the first project that I'm going to be working on with you today is geared towards beginners because we're first going to be working on marbling small pieces of fabric. This is definitely more manageable, especially if it's your first time experimenting with this technique. After dyeing, these small pieces of fabric can be transformed into whatever you want. So from this project, you will have dyed pieces of fabric that can be used as quilting pieces, or you can make it into a hat, or a bag, or a pillowcase, a cushion cover, a tank top, whatever you want. Now, this tank top that I happen to be wearing was dyed after it was sewn, and so is this t-shirt. But you can definitely do the opposite, which is to first marble dye your fabric and then sew it up into a garment or an accessory of your dreams. So after you gain more experience, proficiency, and confidence with the marble dyeing technique, you can move on to more ambitious projects like dyeing up even larger pieces of fabric. And that's what I did here with this jumpsuit. The trouser legs are made up of very large pieces of fabric, and I marble dyed them before sewing it up. In addition, you can also try your hand at dyeing something more three-dimensional, like this pair of canvas shoes. And later on in this video, I'm going to show you some tips on how to marble dye something like this. So without further ado, let's jump right in. The first thing I want to cover is your choice of dyeing agent, which of course goes hand in hand with your choice of fabric that you want to dye. I like to work with natural fibers like cotton, linen, silk, viscose, hemp, or even bamboo. And these natural fibers work with specific dyes that are out on the market. And there are a range of dyes that you can use. I've chosen to work with Procion Dyes, which is a cold water dye for dyeing fabric and for dyeing natural fibers. And this particular one that I'm using today is from Jacquard company, and you can get these products online on Amazon, or you can also go to Dharma Trading Company, which produces high quality Procion dyes as well. If you do not have easy access to Procion dyes, then no worries. You can actually get whatever dye product that is readily available to you. Just make sure that it works with natural fibers. I sometimes like to use RIT dyes for my marble dyeing projects because it's also very effective and it's very easy to use. The only thing to take note of is that every dye product should come with a color fixing process or treatment, and RIT Dye sells a color fixer that I highly recommend that you get if you're going to be using RIT dyes. And also familiarize yourself with the color fixing process because it's different for every brand. So for example, the color fixing for RIT dyes comes after the dyeing process, and for Procion dyes, the color fixing process comes before dyeing. So whatever dye product you choose to use, just make sure that you understand the color fixing process that goes with it as well. In the next section, I'm going to talk all about Procion dyes because that's what I'm going to be using. The technique of marble dyeing, though, is the same for all the dyes that you're going to be using. So that does not change. So let's talk about Procion dyes right now. As I've said before, Procion dyes are cold water dyes made for natural fibers, and they come in a range of colors. I bought a very useful starter kit by Jacquard Products online at Amazon, and this is extremely helpful, especially for anybody starting out with Procion Dyes, because it comes with gloves, rubber bands, plastic spoons to measure out your dye powder, 10 different dye colors, squirt bottles, and the soda ash dye fixer. Now, Procion dyes can be used for a variety of dyeing techniques like tie-dye, batik, immersion dyeing, ice dyeing, and marble dyeing. And today I'll be using a cotton canvas fabric for my project. Cotton is made up of cellulose fibers, which means that it's derived from plants. And this would require a certain pre-treatment process, and you can use this process that I'm showing you today for other plant-derived fabrics as well. For example, linen, hemp, bamboo, or viscose. Now, if you are using animal-derived products, for example, silk and wool, which are protein fibers, then you would need to apply a different pre-treatment process. So it's very important to know the exact fiber content of the fabric that you're going to be using to ensure a successful dyeing experience. When using Procion dyes on cellulose fibers for your dye project, we would need to get two other products. The first product is Synthrapol. Synthrapol is an industrial strength, pH neutral liquid detergent. Now, all fabrics need to be pre-washed before dyeing so that it provides proper shrinkage of the fabrics before starting to work on them. And also, it will remove impurities like dirt, stains, and commercial coatings, and this ensures even coloring. So Synthrapol, as a pre-wash, does a really good job of this. And as an afterwash, it has the unique property of keeping the loose dye particles suspended in the water to prevent back staining while removing excess color. So this is a must if you're working with Procion dyes. The other product that you need to get would be the color fixer, and the color fixer for Procion dyes on cellulose fibers is soda ash. And these two products are from Jacquard Products, and I got them online at Amazon. So make sure that you have these two before starting your project. Later on in the video, I'll be going through the whole pre-treatment process using these two products for your dye project. But before we get there, let's touch on the materials and tools required so you can gather up all these things before we get started. Here are the materials and tools that I gather up for every marbling project. And the first thing to have, of course, is your dyeing fabric. As I said, I'm using a cotton canvas today. For the pre-washing, you would need Synthrapol. For the pre-treatment of color fixer, we would need soda ash. When we are dealing with these products, it's best to be wearing gloves to protect your skin. You can also choose to wear a face mask when handling the soda ash. Here's a big bucket to do all the pre-washing in. When we are mixing the colors, you of course need your choice of dye colors, measuring spoons to measure out the dye powder, a measuring cup to measure out the water that would be mixed in with the dye powder, and you would need squirt bottles to contain the dye solutions. Make sure that you have at least one squirt bottle for every dye color that you are using. And I like to label all my squirt bottles with the right label of color so that I don't get confused, and I do this with masking tape and a Sharpie. When we come to the actual marble dyeing itself, then we would of course need shaving foam, which acts as the base, and make sure you have foam or mousse instead of gel. You would need some kind of medium-sized bowl to loosen up the shaving foam, and you would need a spatula like this to help deal with the shaving foam. And when I am doing the marbling, I like to switch my gloves to these surgical gloves so that it's easier to do detailed work. I also have a bamboo skewer, and this is used as a stylus. You can also use a chopstick if you want, or a wide-toothed comb also to create different types of patterns. You would need a squeegee to level out the shaving foam and also to remove shaving foam after the marbling has been done. I always keep paper towels on hand because things can get kind of messy. And a plastic cover is very important to protect your work surface. Before I even start working, I already lay it out on my work surface so that I do not stain my table. Now, you can recognize some tools here that are also used in the kitchen, and the tools that I have here are only reserved for dyeing. They never go inside my cooking utensil drawer ever. So make sure that you know which ones are for dyeing and which ones are for cooking, and they never mix. That's very important. And now we are ready for the pre-washing and the pre-treatment process.
For the pre-washing, fill up a bucket with enough hot water to submerge your fabric. Then add 3 tablespoons of Synthrapol per 8 pounds of washing load. Agitate the solution to create bubbles, and then we can add our fabric into the soapy solution. Now there's an option to add 2 tablespoons of soda ash into the wash right now and do the dye fixing at this point. If you choose this method, then allow the fabric to soak for at least 10 minutes, then wring it out. The fabric will then be ready for dyeing. Alternatively, what I like to do is to keep a separate soda ash solution for all my dye projects. Doing it this way means that the fabrics will soak in the Synthrapol solution for 10 minutes, then I remove them and wring them out. To prepare a separate soda ash bucket, I add 2 cups of soda ash to 2 gallons of warm water. I give it a really good stir to dissolve the soda ash. And as it dissolves, you'll see the solution change from milky white to clear. Now this soda ash solution can then be stored and used for future projects. And when you start to run out, you can refill it with more solution prepared with the same water to soda ash ratio. When the soda ash has dissolved enough, then it's time to add in the fabric. Allow to soak for 20 minutes before wringing it out. Then the fabric is ready to be dyed. Once the fabric has been treated with soda ash, do your best to keep it from drying out. It should be damp when you are dyeing it. The fabric may fray quite a bit during pre-treatment, so it helps to serge or finish up the raw edges before pre-washing to prevent fraying. Once pre-treatment is done, we can go ahead and mix up the dyes. For the amount of fabric that I'm dyeing today, I don't need a lot of dye solution, so I'm mixing 1 teaspoon of dye powder with 120 milliliters of warm water. Give the dye solution a really good stir so that the dye powder dissolves. I like to work with paper towels ready at this stage to clean up as I go along so that I don't create a big mess. The dye solution is then transferred to squirt bottles that are properly labeled, and make sure you close the bottles tightly. The dye colors that I'm working with today from Jacquard are lemon yellow, brilliant orange, fire engine red, lilac, navy blue, and turquoise. When we've mixed up our dyes, then it's time to prepare the shaving foam. 1 full can of shaving foam can dye approximately a piece of fabric measuring 80 centimeters square. First, I empty out a full can of foam into a mixing bowl, then I add about a half cup of water to loosen up the consistency of it. Mix it up really well with a spatula until the foam resembles whipped heavy cream. Next, we can pour out the foam directly on our work surface that has been lined with a plastic sheet. Spread out the foam to cover an area slightly wider than the fabric you are dyeing. I do this with the help of a spatula, then switch to a squeegee to smoothen out the foam and create a flat surface. Make sure the thickness of the foam is at least a half centimeter thick. When the foam layer is flat and smooth, we are ready to apply the dye colors. I find that marbling works better if I'm using at least 2 colors, but of course it's a matter of personal taste, and you can definitely do it with just 1 color as well for a minimalistic approach. What I like to do is to first decide on a base of warm or cool colors. For example, you see me starting off here with a set of warm tones of yellow, orange, and red. Then I like to add in a couple of complementary colors like turquoise and lilac. One big rule in marbling is to not oversaturate with color, especially when applying contrasting colors, because overmixing may result in unwanted dirty gray or brown tones. So some restraint is good here, and leave negative space as well, which looks really good with marbling. On the other section of the foam, I am doing the opposite by starting off with a set of colors with cool tones, turquoise, navy blue, and lilac. Then I add in some contrast of yellow and orange. Even though one half has a warmer base of color and the other half has a cooler base, these 2 sections can actually go together because there are overlapping colors in both sections, and this works well for my reversible bucket hat. Once the dyes are applied onto the foam, the actual marbling begins. I am using the humble bamboo skewer as a stylus to do the job. The first pass I make travels on a diagonal, and I simply drag the skewer across the colors to create marbling patterns. This is the most magical part of this whole process because it's so mesmerizing to see the marbling created as the stylus travels across the foam. When I finish my first pass on the diagonal, I begin my second pass on the other diagonal. More intricate marble designs can be created with other tools like a wide-toothed comb or a piece of string, and I encourage you to experiment with different tools and to try out different movements across your foam canvas. My only advice is to refrain from overworking the marbling. It takes some experimenting and experience to know when to stop. But definitely have fun with this and try out different marbling patterns. When I'm done with the diagonals, I finish off with one last pass, which is parallel to one edge of the foam, and this is enough for me for today. I'm happy with this patterning, and when you're done with yours, step back and admire your work. One of the trickiest parts of this marbling process is placing the fabric onto the foam canvas in one swift movement. First, make sure that the right side of the fabric will be facing down in contact with the foam. Then drop it down without dragging it on the foam's surface, and this will prevent any kind of distortion. You can get a friend to help you if you need an extra pair of hands for this. Once it's on the foam, pat down or smooth down gently to get rid of all the bubbles or spaces between the fabric and the foam. When the fabric becomes saturated with color, you'll see that it almost disappears into the foam. Allow the fabric to absorb all the color by letting it sit on the foam for at least 10 minutes. Then we're ready to remove it by carefully lifting it off the foam. Make sure there's a surface area lined with a plastic sheet nearby so that you can rest the fabric face up on it. Here's a closer look at the marble patterns on the fabric. It didn't pick up a lot of foam with it, so I will resist removing the leftover foam for now and just leave it as is. The dyes need to penetrate into the fibers, and the fabric now needs to marinate for 12 to 24 hours. So what I do is to sandwich the fabric between plastic sheets, wrap them up, then put them in a plastic bag so that it has the time for the dyes to do its job. I reuse these plastic sheets for future projects. After use, just clean them properly and they are ready for more marbling projects. After marinating for 12 to 24 hours, we're ready for the afterwash. First, do a cold rinse to remove the leftover foam and excess color. I like to do this with the fabric resting on some wire racks. Keep an eye on the color of the water that is running into the drain, and when the water runs almost clear, we can wash the fabrics in a hot water wash with Synthrapol. Prepare the Synthrapol Afterwash with enough hot water to submerge your fabrics. Then add 3 tablespoons of Synthrapol for up to 8 pounds of washing load. Mix up the solution well, then add in your fabric. Agitate the fabric and then the water will darken with the dyes because the Synthrapol is doing its job of releasing even more excess dyes from the fabric. But have no fear, this will not cause any back staining. Allow the fabric to sit in this afterwash for at least 10 minutes. Then you can do a final rinse to remove the washing liquid. Wring out the excess water and air dry your fabric or dry it in the dryer. And now for the big reveal. After I've dried and pressed my fabric, this is what it looks like. I really like how the marbling patterns turned out here. Also be aware that the colors always look darker when wet. In addition, take note of the white areas that weren't dyed and notice how that adds to the marble patterns as well. These fabrics are now ready to be transformed into a garment or an accessory, and I've chosen to make a reversible bucket hat. The sewing pattern is from Albi Textiles, and I love how vibrant Procion dyes are when applied in the right way. This hat is now my new fave accessory, and as promised, I will now share some tips on marble dyeing a pair of canvas shoes. The choice of canvas shoes for marble dyeing is key for its success. I'm using Superga shoes today because the canvas is 100% cotton, which will work very well with Procion Dyes. Another brand of canvas shoes I recommend is Vans. Canvas shoes with a polyester blend will not work as well because of the synthetic fibers, so double check the fiber content of the canvas before purchasing the shoes you want to dye. Also, I like to buy a half-size larger pair of shoes in case the pre-washing shrinks the shoes. Remove the laces from your sneakers and we're ready to make templates out of plastic sheets. For this, you would need some plastic sheets and a Sharpie pen. Trace the outline of the profile of the shoe, and this will be the template for both sides of each shoe. I trace out leaving some room around the shoe because it needs that space to handle the templates easily when we apply the dye to the shoes. For the tongue of the shoe, position the plastic sheet on top of the tongue and trace out the approximate shape of it with a Sharpie. I leave some space around the tongue as well because we would need that space for maneuvering the template. Cut out these templates. We would need 1 tongue template and 2 side profile templates for each shoe. When I am done with this project, I don't throw these templates out. I reuse them and save these templates for future use. These plastic sheets were purchased at the hardware store and they come in large rolls. I think they are used to protect surfaces while painting your walls. I buy them by the meter and they are relatively cheap. You can also use plastic bags or mailers as an alternative. When the templates are done, then it's time to pre-treat the shoes. They need to be pre-washed in Synthrapol, then soaked in soda ash the same way you would do for your fabrics. Leave the shoes to dry till damp, then I tape up the rubber soles of the shoes to prevent the dyes from staining the soles as much as possible. This is an important step, especially when your rubber soles are white, and definitely use gloves while taping because you are coming into contact with the soda ash. When the shoes are prepped, make sure your dyes are readily mixed as well, and we're moving on to preparing the shaving foam the same way we did before. Mix the foam with some water till you get the consistency of whipped heavy cream. Then place the foam on the templates. Make sure the side profile templates are positioned as a mirror image. Then dollop some foam onto each template. Spread out the foam and level out the foam canvas with a squeegee, making sure there's at least a ½ centimeter thickness of foam for your canvas. Then apply the colors that you want. I like to do 1 shoe at a time because this can get really messy and unmanageable when trying to do both left and right shoes at the same time. With a stylus or your marbling tool, start creating the marble patterns after you've applied the dyes. When you're done marbling, the tricky part of placing the dyed foam on your shoes begin. Very carefully lift the tongue template off the work surface and in one sure and swift movement, place the template with the foam side down onto the tongue of the shoe. Repeat the same process with one side template of the shoe. Keep the templates on the shoe and you can check how much the dyes are being absorbed from taking a peek from inside of the shoe. Press the templates gently onto the canvas to remove any possible bubbles or spaces created between the foam and canvas. As you can see, this gets quite messy, so do your best to clean as you go along. Then place the final side template on the shoe and keep checking that the dyes are penetrating into the canvas by taking a look from inside the shoe. Leave the foam and the templates on the shoe for at least 10 minutes. Then we can peel off the templates. When we do this, a thick layer of foam will remain on the shoe. We can scrape off the foam to check and see if the canvas has been evenly dyed. I do this with a piece of wooden scraper, but this can also be done with an old credit card. The marble patterns do not look very impressive right now, but I promise you it'll look better after the dyes have marinated for 12 to 24 hours and after the shoes have been washed and dried. When I scraped off the foam here, I noticed I missed a spot, and this can be easily remedied by placing a bit of colored foam directly onto the canvas. I continue scraping off the rest of the foam and keep that patch of foam there to penetrate a while longer. Continue peeling off the last template and scraping off foam to look out for missed spots, and we can continue dyeing the other shoe. Remember that when both shoes are done, they need to marinate for 12 to 24 hours in a plastic bag, and then they need a cold rinse, a hot Synthrapol wash to remove excess color, and then left to dry. When that's all done, then your newly marble-dyed shoes are ready to be worn. I dyed my shoes in colors to match my bucket hat, and I thoroughly enjoyed sharing this experience with you. I hope you've enjoyed it as well, and thank you for joining me here at the Making Zen online retreat and for supporting my work. If you try your hand at marble dyeing, I would love to see your work, so please share them with me on Instagram and remember to tag me at Jerry in Stitches so that I can celebrate with you. In the meantime, happy crafting and happy marble dyeing!